Whether you're IFS trained and supporting clients in medicine work, or a psychedelic facilitator looking to integrate IFS, Michelle Glass offers courses designed to build confidence in preparation, journey, and integration. Courses include supporting clients' psychedelic journeys utilizing IFS, or her 22-hour comprehensive IFS introduction for psychedelic facilitators. Find out more at her website, thelistenerllc.com. Welcome to Season 6 of the One Inside an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm Tammy Sollenberger, author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about their inner world and who have a desire to connect to that authentic self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I am super excited today to bring Jessica Laurel Kane to the podcast. Jessica is the author of several books, most recently Leaving Cleveland, a memoir, The Boy with a Heavy Suitcase, which is a picture book, and the one that I know about, which is called Once Upon an Upset, Illustrated Stories, Insights, and Reflections to Help Parent Our Children While Reparenting Ourselves. Jessica lives in upstate New York with her husband and son, who's about the same age as my son, which is super cool. So welcome to the podcast, Jessica. Why don't we start where we always start, which is where you are in the world and what you see if you look out your nearest window.
Well, thank you so much, Tammy, and I'm really excited to talk with you, and thank you for being in touch with me. And let's see, where am I? I am in a room that is extremely messy, but I've positioned my camera to hide the mess. And I live, let's see, I live in the middle of the woods in upstate New York. So currently at my window, it is beautiful, sunny. It wouldn't be beautiful as if I was out there because I think it's 7 degrees, something very cold. But there's lots of snow, lots of trees, beautiful long icicles hanging from gutters.
Yeah, it's the same way here. So I live in New Hampshire and it's the same way. Like it's sunny. And so I look outside and I see I see it snowy too. And I was about to take my dog for a walk and I was like, Alexa, how cold is it outside? And she was like, it's 7. Actually, I think she said it was 11 degrees. It's 11 degrees. And I was like, no,
Yeah,
we'll go for a walk later.
very cool.
So I found out about you when Kirsten Lundberg, who is a IFS trainer, reached out to me and she was like, have you heard of this person? Have you read her book? And I was like, no. So she sent me your book, which is so sweet. To get actual snail mail is amazing. And so she sent me the book. And so let me just describe the cover. So on the cover of the book it looks like a mom yelling at her. So you see the face of the mom yelling at her child, like her child is in front of her looking at her. And then in the mom's head, like instead of like a brain, you can see the mom's hair and eyes, but instead of a brain, looks like, and this is all illustrated, like a mom and dad yelling at her, like she's wearing, like her as a little girl with like megaphones. And so it's an incredible picture of our parts, or sort of our inner parts and how they play out. So tell me about this picture. Tell me about where you got these ideas, because you didn't come from a place of IFS. Like I think my understanding is you didn't even know IFS when you wrote this book, which is amazing to me.
I didn't. In fact, I think it was Kirsten who introduced me to it on my Facebook page. I had discovered kind of parts during a silent meditation retreat that I went on. I was in a this is before I had my son, and I was having such a hard time. My mom was going nuts. My marriage was having a little rocky period, and I just felt like all the wounds that I'd been hiding my whole life had been finally starting to ooze. My coping mechanisms to kind of avoid and dissociate were failing me. So I did this silent meditation retreat. A friend of mine insisted that I do this. It was a huge big deal to go off for 10 days and not speak to anybody. And
Yeah,
um,
that's a long time.
it was really hard for me. And that was when I started hearing these different versions of my younger selves. I mean, all I had was me and me and me and me and me through all these hours of sitting, and it wound up being this huge shift in my life because I was able to finally talk to these younger people who I used to be and hear their story. It was actually really fun. I like to turn things into being entertaining, probably because I get bored very easily. But it was really quite a spectacular experience hearing, kind of interviewing all these younger parts of me. And I had been neglected a lot in my childhood years. So because I learned how to be neglected, I mean, I learned what that felt like. I also learned to neglect myself. So I had never even, no one ever asked me, hey, how are you doing? How do you feel? There's been a lot of chaos going on in your life. I'd like to help you process. No one ever did that. So I treated myself the way I was treated. And it was like something I'd always intellectualized things. I'd been keeping journals. So I was narrating kind of my upsets in an intellectual way, but I had never really felt that I had been wounded. I didn't realize that those wounds even mattered. Um, so all of a sudden, there was younger selves who were pissed off. Like one, kind of gave me the finger at one point. Like been ignored and neglected, and but mostly they just were very sad, very lonely, had a ton of things they wanted to share about things that had happened, and so that's when I first started realizing there were all these parts and younger selves that were still kind of living within me. And then I think like once I had a child, that's when things started getting really crazy because I did not like the people who kind of raised me, if you want to call it that. I didn't like their styles of of how they spoke to me, how they didn't honor my feelings. And yet I kept hearing those voices in my head while I would, get in a conflict situation with my son. I could feel that option of being those voices that had, you know, spoke to me that way. And I found it so fascinating. And I figured, maybe a long time ago, that was a good thing. We were treated, we were nurtured, and then we internalized that nurturing, and then that comes out. But if we've had dysfunction and we internalize dysfunction, then the glitch happens. And I had to stop myself so many times wanting to say the exact same things that I've written like memoirs about how horrible it was. And here I am just effortlessly thinking that I'll do the same thing. So that's where that illustration came from because here's my son upset. And it's like, am I yelling? Or is this the internalized yelling that I'm still hearing? And that's my way of coping with conflict because that's what I saw role model to me. So I was trying to get that in the illustration. And then came the work, what do I believe in? What are my values? What's important to me? What's most meaningful to me as a mother, as myself? And, then I got into the tricky part of self-punishing. Well, I'm gonna be a perfect mother. I'm never gonna do that. And then it's like layers and layers of ways to cope and ways to try to survive and ways to not be punished and not to be abandoned. So it's like to become human for myself has been, there's no way to put hospital corners around it. I can't kind of have a formula to be perfect. So it's just been a process of self-compassion, messiness, letting things be messy. So that's what kind of Once Upon an Upset's about. I have a history of panic attacks. It's one of the reasons I moved up here. So I always wanted to write a book that you could open to any page and find like a little anecdote or a little something to relate with or a little self-compassion to kind of anchor back into the self instead of out in no man's land, which is where I spent a lot of time. So that was my hope with this book.
There is a beautiful image, and I wish I could find it now, I don't have it marked. You being, or the person in the illustration is holding a phone, and there's like a self in the pregnant body, and it's kind of hunched over, and it says, oh, you write, only you get to say when you'll give birth to your creative self. And I love that. So tell me about this idea of even just organically, you organically were able to be the self, like at IFS, we call the authentic self that was loving these parts. So during the silent retreat, it sounds like you were already yourself loving and giving all these younger versions of you compassion, which isn't usually how we handle when we first hear about parts of us. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious about how you just knew that that's how you wanted to be with them.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I feel like I had been so oriented to pay attention in quite in a lot of detail to the outside world around me. So I'd kind of honed my awareness skills at a very young age. I literally kept notes about what was going on. It was a coping mechanism to kind of um, make sure the world was something I could understand because it was often very chaotic and crazy. And I started to develop a relationship with my compassionate voice within. I don't really know how it started. And that's what the Leaving Cleveland book is about, that relationship. From a very young age, I had this imaginary friend who would be so kind to me. Um, like, kids have imaginary friends, but I just went with it because I was so neglected. It just became my coping mechanism, and I vacillated between, is this real or is this a coping mechanism or who cares? So I think that voice had always been like the parental figure. I watched a ton of, when I was like 7, 8, and 9, I watched a ton of TV shows, in my beanbag chair. So I think it was kind of like a composite of my favorite kind of funny people and mothering people. And so this imaginary voice started showing me what it felt like to have someone to talk to and give compassion to. And I think as I got older, I kind of took over that part with myself. I'd already been, looking outward, finding someone like, pick me up from the crib, pick me up with a cup of coffee, pick me up, out there. Let me have something out there to save me in here. And I feel like maybe it did start at that meditation retreat, but slowly I started turning that in on myself and realizing that I matter enough where I could actually give those things to myself. Because I'd already found compassion for other people, was able to understand people's unhealed parts and not take them as personally. But I'd never done that to myself. It still takes me something to remember that I matter, not just on paper in my books that I write, but off screen to sit down with myself and not just be consumed with like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I did that in 1998. Oh my god, asshole." Just like really to use those skills to be like, "Okay, let's talk this out." And I do that a lot these days. I actually in the middle of the night, I have whisper conversations with myself, and I guess like what in your languaging that would be my authentic self. I mean, in my languaging, I just always call it my current self because my authentic self is always evolving. So whoever the current self is on any particular day, I just talk to the other selves, the hurt selves, the wounded selves, and I remember to breathe compassion and understanding. It takes me so much effort still, I was built up on a faulty foundation, and I talk a lot about that in my memoir about how to, and I guess in the Once Upon an Upset book as well, how to strengthen those faulty foundations. What it needs, just like a builder going back in, like an emotional builder. What does that foundation need so that I can feel like I have more choices to be stable? Because oh my god, I used to fall apart all the time, and of course, no one knew because I was a people pleaser. I grew up with weakness being pathologized. If you show any weakness, oh boy, someone needs some meds, someone needs a psychiatrist, someone needs to be locked up. So I kept all those sorts of weaknesses to myself. I still have a hard time. I can talk about it, but when I'm really in those moments, it takes a lot. I would have to be like really in a bad shape to send a message to my therapist and be like, "I'm falling apart here." You know?
Hmm. Yeah. A lot of people will say that if you weren't born with those structures, then it's very hard to find them or to find positive structures or stable structures as you get older. So how did you do that? How did you talk about being raised by a mom who had paranoia? And so even as you're talking right now, I'm thinking like how did you then know to create stabilizing structures for yourself?
Um, that's a really good question. I feel like I started taking notes. I really believe that the writing was my lifesaver. I think I started writing because I wanted it was almost like I wanted someone to read it and be like, "Wow, she's so cute and clever. Let's adopt her." You know? Like trying to get love, trying to get attention, whatever. Um, but the work of taking notes, it became kind of like, I guess you'd say like an addiction or just like mental hygiene. I don't know, but through all these years of taking notes, I feel like I developed my awareness. Um, and I just forgot the question. Where was I going with that?
About, like, how do you know what, like, healthy structures like, how do you not know what they are or, like, how to create them for yourself when you'd never have them?
Yeah. So if you're really got like perimenopause, I'm in that now. I like
Yeah.
just all of a sudden I'd be like, where am I? What am I doing? Forgive me.
No,
Yeah,
it's I get it.
the structures, I feel like I kind of developed paying attention through the writing and just constantly paying attention. And that's been my coping mechanism of figuring things out. I am a
Yeah.
big time, I need to figure it out. And I sit and I take out my pen and, I can like fractal too deep and then get it's all gobbledygook. And then I just say, okay, time to breathe, breathe in, breathe
Mm.
out. And then I cleanse the palate. But I'm just naturally bent towards needing structured understanding of the goings on. I also have a background of OCD. Um, so, it's another one of those messy things. Like only I get to say when my ritual is becoming destructive versus constructive. So I that's another way of structuring my thoughts. I am the one who gets to say, and it's because of checking in with myself. In the past, I'd be like, oh, I wonder what that person would see of this ritual right now. I wonder if they would think that I need medication right now. I wonder if they think that I would need to call 911 if it's really bad. But now I turn it into myself and I check in with all those parts. Are we falling apart? Okay, let's find some glue. Let's find some glue, and the glue is compassion. The glue is understanding. Who needs a hug? I swear to God, like my main tools now are love and hugs with myself. Validation, love and hugs. It's so simple because I forget everything, especially with the perimenopause thing. Like I can always remember, go back to love, go back to compassion, go back to
Mm.
validation. Like for me, compassion is validation. And, my mother was paranoid, but she was incredible. She was this incredible woman. And when she was in her psychotic break, I think that's why I became a writer because her psychotic breaks weren't fun to be around, but they were very interesting. But even when she was such an odd person because she was so nurturing. She was
Mm.
kind of trying to tell herself, there's nothing. Can I swear? Because
Yeah.
there is nothing fucking wrong with me. Like, that was her thing, and there is nothing fucking wrong with you. She would just constantly, because she had been pathologized her whole life. And her paranoia is really interesting in terms of parts work. She had seriously internalized those critical voices, and she was sure that they weren't hers because she loved herself so much that she came up with the idea the government must have implanted a chip in my brain. That's the only way I can understand this because I love myself. But those voices, she was so badly emotionally abused. Those voices just she didn't have the tools to kind of do that critical thinking, to go within, because going within herself was still not a familiar thing to do because she was such a survivor on the outside. But she taught me a lot about this kind of critical looking at the parts and putting them together with compassion. And I remember one time I was in her apartment, she was constantly in and out of the hospital because she self-medicated with, pills and alcohol together, which is a very bad idea. And, she was on her deathbed yet again, and I was in her apartment down in Florida. And when she was psychotic, she could be scary because she would talk to the voices out loud. That was pretty wild and scary, so I learned to be strong at a young age, and I was in her apartment, and I was like she'd had a seizure, there's blood splattered, and I was scared. It was dark, I was in a new place, and I could kinda, like, hear her voices, and I could hear all those things that scared her. I could feel it, like these monsters, and then I was like, "Holy shit, I am stuck here. I can't leave this apartment. How am I gonna cope here?" And then I went back. This was, like, before my son was born, but I was like, "I'm gonna give these guys love." So I was like, "You know what? You guys must be scared too. You know, you've probably been trying to get through to my mother and she's misinterpreting you." I'm creating this, but it's the metaphor and the reality of talking to these was very therapeutic. And I realize giving anything that scares us, obviously there's a context where that's not accurate, but in this context, it suddenly loosened the fear because I replaced the fear with understanding and compassion. And that was another really beautiful, powerful moment for me. And then I wrote my mother a note and I slipped it into her jeans pocket and I wrote, "When you're hearing all those voices that scare you, I want you to also find mine in there. I want you to find my voice because I know who you are and you are the most wonderful person. And I hope that you'll hear my voice in your head too, because I'm always here too." So that was a really beautiful moment. She's passed um, really tragically. So I get emotional when I talk about her. She was one of a kind, you know. The main abuse that I suffered, I did suffer a lot because of her circumstantial abuse. She was not available because she was around the country trying to dodge the government. She created a huge dramas, huge dramas. At one point, she actually got the FBI involved because she was calling them and saying like, "Leave me the fuck alone." But she was also brilliant. So that's another thing about parts. I realized in my mind, I was like, this is really interesting because my mother's a genius in one area, but in another area, she's incapable of functioning. I was like, isn't
When
that
I had to
interesting that we
move
can be
away from
all
her,
those
I
things?
had to move in
You
with my
know,
Right.
in
Yeah.
father,
life she can't
and my
function, but in her
father
mind,
was married
she
to
was a
he's been
natural,
married 5 times
strategic
by this point,
thinker
but back
in
then,
some ways, mostly for helping
he,
others.
I had 2 stepmothers back to back, and their main parts, I guess you'd say, that they governed with and that they led with were the authoritarian figures. There wasn't a lot of love, none really. I mean, other than the roof over your head. Um, so I had some that's what my book, my memoir is about that period of time a lot. Um, but that's the part that took me a long time to heal from. Not so much the craziness of my mother, that too, but the authoritarian figures are even worse than the paranoid parts of, growing up with a paranoid person. Because the authoritarian people want to tell you, and then a young mind, they wanted to tell my young developing mind that there was a way to do things. There's a way to be. You're supposed to be this way. You're supposed to do that way. And if you don't, you're going to get punished. And your punishment is going to be staying alone with your horrible self. Because I was grounded and meant to stay in a room by myself. And that's a really unhealthy message to send to a kid. Some kids might have been fine with it. But for me, it was very damaging because I wanted to be connected. I wanted to be with people. I'd just been neglected by my mother for years. and being told that I was punished and had to be with myself as my punishment. It wasn't blatantly said like that, but that was what it was. And gosh, uh, it was very damaging, and that I had to act perfect in order to not receive that punishment. Perfect meaning do what they say. I mean, look at where I live now. I live in the middle of nowhere because I still have that part like, oh my God, I don't want to have to go out. That's so exhausting. I have to look good. I have to act good. And someone might ask me what I'm doing in life. And then, I got to tell them, like, I just, just the whole seeing through that critical gaze has had me living all these years later in isolation. That's kind of like where my current healing is, to kind of try to step out of this safe zone, which has been wonderful to have a safe zone. But a safe zone for a really long time becomes kind of a prison.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. How are you doing sharing all of that with me?
Oh, I love sharing, and you're such a good listener, and your listening of me has just been natural to want to be authentic with you. So I appreciate your kind listening, and you have such a natural, non-judging, compassionate presence. So thank you for the space.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Earlier you said something about glue, and that reminded me of one section of your book called "The Girl Who Was Born with Glue in Her Brain." Um, so So this was so interesting. So it says, you write a story about a girl with a handful of thoughts that keep her from being able to enjoy her life as much as she would like to, and what she eventually decides to do about it. But again, I love the picture. There's this illustration picture of a girl with um, it almost looks like a picture frame and as her brain, and sort of her brain is there, and then it looks like a bunch of paddles, like, stuck in her brain with different words, and then it looks like maybe there's a scary doctor that's making a shaming face and, like, pointing at, um at the words, like, pointing at her brain like she was bad, and this is one of the things that you write. "Once there was a girl who was born with glue in her brain. At first, she didn't know about the glue. She only knew that something seemed wrong about her brain because so many of her thoughts seemed to get stuck to it." So then what does she do? Tell me what does the girl do about the glue in her brain?
Well, there's also I made a picture book of that story. So I actually have,
Oh, really? Okay.
but that's a very simplified story about, um, cycled, looping thoughts that are very hard to get off that conveyor belt with. And that's something that I still struggle with occasionally. I'll get on a thought loop and man, I just go to town. I just find it's so hard for me. I have to figure out all of these different coping mechanisms. Like, what do I do here? Do I give love and compassion to this conveyor belt thought? I'll try that. Or do I just breathe in and out? Try that. But then my brain will just cycle back. And sometimes I have to do the homeopathic method, like cancels like. And I'll just say, like, okay, you know what? And I'll just validate the most horrible thought that I'm having until I get it so concentrated that it becomes ridiculous. I could even give you an example of something that happened.
That'd
So
be
we
great.
went. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that makes me feel vulnerable, but it's also funny. So I'll tell you. So we went out of town, and my son has a lot of difficulty. Of course, he's my son. He likes to be in his safe space, and he doesn't like to go out a lot. So we finally went on this trip. We had a really amazing time. We were in Montreal. He wanted to go on walks. He wanted to do all these things, and it was just amazing. And then we went to this Italian restaurant for dinner, and he wanted to order the meatballs. And I never make him meatballs. We just don't do beef here, but he wanted, and I'm like, I'm not going to tell him no. He's so excited to try new things. and he had the meatball, and then suddenly I was like, "Oh my god, what if he gets mad cow disease?" It didn't matter how irrational that could have been, you know, my mind stuck on that because, I mean, I was so used to finding a problem,
Mm,
to cope and survive. That's kind of the underlying thing with me. I don't have a lot of experience going with things and letting things go, but I have a lot of experience finding something to do with a problem and solving it. And then the glitch will happen where I have to resolve, resolve, resolve. So I got myself into such a ridiculous thing that I had to call my therapist. I was like, because I knew I was being ridiculous. And I just called her. I was like, "You know what? I've tried so many things. I've tried being compassionate." And then we just started laughing because she repeated, validate. She's like, "So you're worried right now. You're having this wonderful trip, and you're worried." She wasn't even making fun of me. She's like, "You're worried that your son has contracted mad cow from the meatball that you had." It was just so funny. It was just so ridiculous. So now whenever I get on a thought loop, I'll email her and I say, "I'm afraid that the meatball has mad cow." She knows it no matter what the situation is. But the in the book, what happens is she goes to a thought specialist, and the thought specialist lets her know that she has had all these same thoughts cycling through her brain. She just needs to replace those thoughts with
mm,
different thoughts. So the whole book is her realizing, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I could implant new thoughts." And the reason that seems unnatural is because we don't have experience with the new thoughts. But the old thoughts feel like friends because they're familiar.
mm, mhm,
And so the book is her trying out and giving it a chance with these new thoughts and realizing that once you start using those new thoughts, then you've given them focus, you've given them attention, and they become integrated in your way of of dealing with what's real. It's like I talk in my book. I have this piece about looking for red items in your house or anywhere, looking for things that are red. And as soon as you tell yourself you're going to look for things that are red, you might never have noticed them before, but all of a sudden there's like, oh my God, there's so many different red things in the house. And that's like my metaphor that I tell myself when I'm looking for what's wrong, looking for
mm.
what's wrong. I have this evidence. This person didn't email me back about my new memoir. There you go. It's not going to work out again. There you go. But then it's so interesting because it really is kind of almost like magic because of how many things we overlook. I was so looking for where things aren't going to work that I didn't realize, oh my gosh, I also got a message from somebody who read an earlier draft of my memoir. And she said that it was really beautiful and it made an impact on her. There you go. Why wasn't I focused on that? Because I'm so used to finding the things that don't work so that my brain knows what to do in that situation. My brain knows, okay, here we go again. We're going to cope with isolation because this world isn't made for us. We don't belong here.
Yeah,
But to have somebody be really open and kind, I'm like, well, what do I do now? I'm just going to fuck it up. I'm going to disappoint them. Sooner or
right.
later, I'm going to disappoint them. Then I'm going to be punished and I'm going to be sent to my room all by my horrible self again. So I might as well just
Yeah,
look for the bad stuff and be happy. I've got a nice rug here. I got a comfortable bed. It's not so bad. I know how
yeah.
to cope with not being someone who's welcome in the world. So it's so tricky to step out of those old constraints and to find new ways to feel comfortable. So that's been my kind of healing, and that's what that Glue Brain book is about readjusting things, finding ways to feel comfortable
Mm,
within myself um, in a constructive way.
mm,
Realizing, oh my gosh, we all belong here. If someone came to
mm.
me and said, I I don't belong in this world, nothing ever works out for me, I'd be like, oh my God, look at you. You're gorgeous. Your presence exudes love. I'm happier with you right now that you're in the world. But then to look at myself and be like, gosh, I'm gorgeous. I deserve to be in the world. I'm happy with myself. So it's like we're so used to being, so many of us, neglected. We dissociate. We don't even see ourselves for who we are.
Mm.
So that's what my whole healing has been.
It's beautiful, and I love how you're saying that it's like these parts of us, we're just they're familiar friends. And so to be like, these are my familiar friends in my glue brain, and okay, wait, I can have other parts, or I can have other friends, and that's scary because that's not as safe. Like, it's safe to stay in the isolation. It's safe. Your system is like, it's safe to stay over here. And then if it's something in you, maybe the current you, your current self is saying, we could try something different. It's really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, one more thing. I mean, your book is so good. I love I love this one so much. So, you have one picture with, it looks like a little boy, and it has like a red like monster coming out of its mouth. And you write this: it's important to have an internal bodyguard, but if it's always feeling the need to protect you, others will probably feel the need to bring out their own bodyguards, and everyone will wind up protecting themselves instead of connecting. That's amazing. So tell me about that. That's amazing.
I probably originally thought of that just thinking about the dynamic with my husband. So funny, we meet people who, it's like the mortise. I think I write something about that in the book, like how we meet people who mortise each other to our coping mechanisms. Like my theme was, what about me? And
Mm,
his was, because of his, you know, trauma he endured, was leave me alone. So can you imagine that mortise?
mhm.
So I tried extra hard. What about me? But I was also very careful to be who I thought he wanted me to be, so I didn't pressure him so much, and he loved that. And then we've been married 27 years. Married a long time. We met each other way before we even thought we needed to heal anything, He was like he's like a big guy, and I think that has something to do with why, I was feeling so unsafe. And he's just like this big, strong, loyal presence.
Mm,
And so that was something that drew us together, and so many other things. But for the context of what you're talking about, I think I realized as we, stopped doing our people pleasing with each other, how interesting it was to get in arguments, because it was both our people who are trying to protect ourselves, like needing to be right and protect ourselves, thinking that other person, you look at my husband, but really he's the stepmothers, he's everybody, whoever, you know,
yeah, yeah.
made me feel invalid. That a lot of the things that I learned with my relationship with my husband, I write about, because when we started validating each other and, talking about our times where we had to be our bodyguards and we weren't connecting well, suddenly we had more choices for who to be with each.
That's beautiful. Right, so if it's my bodyguard and your bodyguard and those
Yeah.
protective parts of us are having a relationship, there isn't much choice because my bodyguard's trying to protect me, your bodyguard's trying to protect you. So
Yeah.
not a lot of connecting and not a lot of choice and not a lot of joy in that
Yeah.
relationship for sure.
Yeah. And it's so interesting the different ways that we're silenced with our vulnerability growing up. And it's like, even if someone says like, "Hey, I love you so much, let's get married." It's like, well, in those moments, like, fuck you. You're out to get me, you know? And so it's also like, gosh, I could have a whole episode just on marriage, but just, the whole thing for me was thinking like, well, this person isn't gonna save me either.
Mm.
Like, what is marriage? Like, what are we even doing here? And then, when we're both healing ourselves and then we connect as people who are going through this crazy life thing together, and we can be vulnerable together and support each other. So it's just kind of reorganizing who we are for each other.
I love that. Um, so one more illustration that I love, and you're doing a great job because I'm just pulling these out. I didn't say like, "Oh, I'm going to talk about these 5 ones." This one, which I think is a great way to end. There's a picture of a girl and her heart. It's a heart. Her heart's kind of hollow, and it says, "Sometimes I search desperately outside of myself for a place to rest and be still, forgetting that this place is inside of me." I love it so much. Yes.
Gosh, that goes right in line with that whole thing of like the self is punishment versus the self is refuge.
Mm,
It's that's been like my biggest theme, running outside of myself. Even if it's
mm,
running for the refrigerator, running for coffee, running for bread, running for a phone call, running on Amazon to buy something to organize my socks. Anything to avoid that spot within myself that feels like, oh no, I'm stuck. Nobody wants me. I'm punished. To then doing the work and doing the step by step. Wait a minute. Wow, I forgot. I have this amazing efficiency apartment right within myself. We can talk to ourselves in here. You can have talk to all those younger selves. There's not any, and even the ancestors. God, I spend more time talking to dead people than alive people. We can access so much stuff within ourselves that it's like the nutrients for our soul, our spirit, our heart. And and whenever I have those moments like that, it's just such a relief to know that I have the ability to feel safe within myself, and not only safe, to have some joy and humor. We can have a good time with ourselves with telling stories and making sense, and then we can write about it and share it.
mm. That's beautiful. Okay, so tell everyone where they can find you, or if they can find you on Facebook, get your books, all
Yeah.
that good stuff.
Thank you. So a lot of people are leaving Facebook because of what's
Mhm.
going on in our country and all that, but I still think it's an amazing community regardless. There's corrupt people all over the place and it's problematic, but fixing your settings and stuff like that, I think Facebook is worth staying for the community. So I can be found on there. My page is Once Upon an Upset. And, my website is onceuponanupset.com, and I sign books if people wanna purchase them from there. I have all my books available there. My newest book, my memoir, Leaving Cleveland, which took me, ugh, years and years and years to finish. And then Once Upon an Upset is there along with, some other books as well. And, of course, they're easily accessible on Amazon as well.
That's great, Jessica. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share before I ask my last question?
Gosh, I think I've said so much, and thank you for letting me go on and on. It's been such a pleasure meeting you and getting to share with you, and thank you for your kindness and your generosity. And
Mm.
it's
Well,
been
thank
so
you. This has been a long process, Jessica, because I reached out to you, was it a year ago?
gosh. Well, if you feel
It
like
might
you're
have been more than that.
yeah, I don't even know. I mean, my life is like you said, it's just all over the place. And then plus with this perimenopause, like a whole month will go by and I don't even remember.
Well, I'm glad that we have similar parts that and we finally made this happen because this book is amazing. I actually have um Kirsten sent me a magnet even. I have a magnet on my fridge of one of the things from your book because it's just so helps me really connect to my true self or my current self, which I love that phrase. So thank you so much for your
Yeah.
work and your
And
vulnerability and your
the magnet
stories.
comes with all anytime someone purchases that book, I send along a little magnet. So
Okay, well, definitely everyone get the books for the because the magnet, the book's amazing and it's beautiful and I highly recommend it. But I do love my magnet too.
I'm so glad.
So last question, if you had to do something different in the world than what you do now, what would you do?
I mean, I'm always so work focused, so the first thing that came to mind was I wanted to do a podcast, a new podcast where I talk to different kinds of people, and that would definitely take me out of a comfort zone. But in terms of non-work things, I would like to find a community, try to find a new place to live that's a little bit less isolated, to kind of step out of my comfort zone, not only online and, but try something different.
I like it. I like it. That sounds good and a little bit scary. A part of me is like, "That sounds a little bit scary."
Yeah, it sounded scary to me when I just shared it too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you in person, kind of in person this way. But it's really I love your work. It's so great. I just really appreciate you. So thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you left a rating, a review, a like, comment, share with your family, your friends. That would mean so much to me. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or on Amazon. You can visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, or you can download a free Get to Know a Should part of you. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and at The One Inside on Facebook and on YouTube. Jeff Schrum co-produces The One Inside, and I am forever grateful for Jeff. Also thankful for Jack Reardon for creating the music, and just thank you for listening. 6 seasons, over 1 million downloads. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you in this community. I'll see you next time.